The rain in Illinois has been relentless this year. Even though my farm sits on the highest point in the area, my basement has flooded 4 times. Usually, being on a hill means the water runs away from you, but this year the ground is so saturated it has nowhere to go. In the fields surrounding my home, the crops are dangerously behind schedule, and huge, standing ponds have formed where there used to be dry soil. The ducks and geese seem to enjoy the new lakes, but for those of us trying to live on the land, it feels like we are sinking. My situation is a bit unique. I live on an 8-acre farm that used to be out in the country, but over the decades, the suburbs grew up around us. Now my quiet pastures are bordered by rows of modern houses and paved streets. Normally I don't mind the neighbors, but with the strange things happening lately, I feel trapped. If I were out in the middle of nowhere, I might feel like I had room to breathe. Here, with the fences of the subdivision pressing in on one side and a local cemetery on the other, the atmosphere has become suffocating. The true strangeness began about 3 weeks ago during a massive storm. It rained for 6 days straight without a single break. It was a localized event. The clouds seemed to anchor themselves directly over our small town. I remember driving 30 miles away to buy hay for the livestock, and just 10 miles down the road, the sky was perfectly blue. I loaded my truck in the sunshine, but as soon as I drove back toward my farm, I crossed a literal line of gray clouds and plunged back into a downpour so thick I could barely see the hood of my truck. After I struggled to get the hay bales into the barn to keep them dry, I started walking back to the house. The pasture was a soup of thick, black mud. As I trudged through it, I noticed a peculiar pattern in the muck. It looked as though dozens of snakes had been swimming through the mud, leaving behind swishing, S-shaped tracks. I followed the trails for a few yards until I found the source. In a low spot of the field, there was a writhing, pulsing mass of worms. They were the size of large night crawlers, but their color was wrong. They were a bright, vibrant red, almost the color of a fresh wound. I had lived in this county a long time, and while I'm no expert on every bug in the dirt, I had never seen anything like them. I assumed the heavy rain had simply flooded their deep tunnels and forced them to the surface. I didn't want to touch them, so I left them to their business and went inside to dry off and get some coffee. The weather finally broke the next day. The sun came out, and by the following afternoon the heat was intense. I walked back out to the pasture, expecting to find a pile of dead, dried-up worms that had been cooked by the sun. Instead, there was nothing left of the red mass. In their place were several dozen holes in the dirt, each about the size of a dime. I figured the worms had simply dug back down into the cool earth once the surface dried out. I thought they were lucky to have survived. I was wrong. Within a few days, I noticed that the grass around those holes wasn't just turning brown, it was turning black. Everything green in that circle had wilted and rotted away. I found it confusing because every farmer knows that worms are supposed to be good for the soil. They aerate the ground and help things grow. These red things were doing the exact opposite. The rot began to spread. It moved in thin, black lines that looked like veins or tendrils stretching out across the pasture. Everywhere these lines touched, the life was sucked out of the plants. Along these black paths, more dime-sized holes appeared. But soon, a new feature emerged: larger, rougher pits. These were 4 or 5 inches deep, looking as if something had been digging upward from deep underground, or pulling something down. I grew worried when the black tendrils reached my vegetable garden. I tried everything I knew to stop it. I dug up the soil at the edge of the rot to see if I could find the worms, but the dirt was always empty, as if they knew I was looking for them. I sprayed heavy doses of insecticide around the perimeter, but the blackness ignored the poison and kept moving. It reached my broccoli and cauliflower plants, turning them into mushy black skeletons within 24 hours. That was when the death started. At first, it was just small garden pests. I found moles that had climbed out of their burrows only to die right on top of their holes. Then I found dead shrews and small rabbits scattered around the edge of the garden. The strange part was that the bodies would be there in the evening, but by the next morning, they would be completely gone. I tried to convince myself that a fox or a coyote was scavenging the carcasses, but deep down, I knew the pattern didn't fit. The situation turned from strange to terrifying last Wednesday. I was jolted awake in the middle of the night by my dogs. They weren't barking at a stranger or a deer. They were making a sound I had never heard from them before. It was a mixture of a growl and a terrified whine, the sound an animal makes when it is cornered by something it doesn't understand. I put on my slippers and went outside with a high-powered flashlight. I scanned the garden, expecting to see a predator, but the yard was still. Then, the beam of my light hit the back of the garden, and I felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the night air. There was a large hole in the ground, about 3 feet deep. I knew that exact spot. That was where I had buried my old German Shepherd, Sam, after he passed away last summer. I walked to the edge of the hole and looked down. The dirt had been pushed outward, and the space where my dog's body should have been was completely empty. I went back into the house, my hands shaking so hard I could barely pour a cup of coffee. I stayed awake until dawn, watching the shadows. 2 nights later, the nightmare took a physical toll. I heard a single, sharp yelp from outside. By the time I got to the door, one of my dogs was gone. There was a smear of blood on the porch, but no body and no sign of a struggle. Since then, I haven't let my remaining dogs out of my sight. They stay inside with me, and if they need to go out, I walk with them, carrying my rifle. The farm is now a graveyard of a different sort. The black rot has taken over most of the 8 acres. Every morning, I find new signs of activity. There are paw prints in the garden mud, prints that look like a dog's, but the gait is off, as if the animal is dragging itself or moving in a way that isn't natural. All of my chickens are gone now. I found blood in the coop, but once again, the bodies had vanished completely. The most horrifying discovery happened yesterday. Along my back privacy fence, 3 new holes have appeared. They are large and ragged, located exactly where I buried my barn cats over the last few years. Something is systematically emptying the graves on my property. I have spent the last 48 hours trying to make sense of the red worms, the black rot, and the empty holes. I kept hoping there was a logical, biological explanation, some kind of invasive parasite or a strange reaction to the extreme flooding. But this morning, my thin hope vanished. My farm shares a border with the town cemetery. This morning, the police arrived at the graveyard. From my porch, I could see them standing around a fresh site near the fence line. It wasn't a small hole like the ones in my garden. It was a massive, jagged crater, 6 feet deep. I could see the splintered wood of a casket scattered around the edge of the pit. The police are calling it a grave robbery, a senseless act of vandalism by someone with a shovel. But I saw the black tendrils of rot crossing the fence line yesterday. I know that no man with a shovel could make the earth move that way. I am sitting in my kitchen now, watching the sun begin to set over the hills of Illinois. The rain is starting again, a soft tapping against the glass. I am looking at the dime-sized holes appearing in the dirt near my back door, and I am praying that I am wrong. I am praying that it really is just a grave robber, and not whatever was in those red worms, calling everything back up from the dark.